Here's what happens a lot in a neurodiverse marriage where one person is autistic, the other one is not. When the NT wife approaches the ASD husband to talk about relationship problems, he runs because he feels attacked. When he runs, she chases after him because she feels abandoned.
Cognitive restructuring enables people on the autism spectrum to correct distorted conceptualizations and dysfunctional beliefs. The process involves challenging their current thinking with logical evidence and ensuring the rationalization and cognitive control of their emotions. Now, the first stage of cognitive restructuring is to establish the evidence for a particular belief. People on the autism spectrum often make false assumptions of their circumstances and the intentions of others, and they have a tendency to make a literal interpretation, and a casual comment may be taken out of context or may be taken to the extreme. All people are vulnerable to distorted conceptualizations, but people on the autism spectrum are less able to put things in perspective, to seek clarification, and to consider alternative explanations or responses. So neurotypical spouses can encourage their autistic spouse to be more flexible in their thinking and to seek clarification using questions or comments such as, "Are you joking?" or "I'm confused about what you just said." Such comments also can be used when misinterpreting someone's intentions, such as, "Did you do that deliberately?" And to rescue the situation after they've made an inappropriate response with a comment such as, "I'm sorry I offended you," or, "Oh, what should I have done instead?" One common effect of misinterpretation is the development of paranoia. The person on the autism spectrum can have difficulty distinguishing between accidental or deliberate intent. Now, neurotypical people will know from the context, body language, and character of the other person involved that the intent was not to cause distress or injury. However, people on the spectrum can focus primarily on the act and the consequence. So people on the spectrum may need to be trained in checking the evidence before responding and developing more accurate mind-reading skills.
I got an email from a neurotypical woman who's in a relationship with a man with Asperger's syndrome, and she's asking, why is my husband so sensitive to criticism? It seems as though everything I say, he perceives that as me being critical, and then he gets very defensive, and then the arguments start. Well, in order to answer that question, we really have to talk about the amygdala, which, as many of you know, is just a part of your brain. But it's more than just any old part. It is the fear center of the brain. It helped us survive back in the day, quite honestly. And people with Asperger's syndrome do tend to have an overly active and even in some cases physically enlarged amygdala. And so that would explain briefly, why they have such anxiety. The disorder comes with anxiety, but also they grew up in an environment that reinforced that anxiety, namely knowing that they just could not fit in socially. The link between the amygdala and fear processing does indeed shed a lot of light on how anxiety can take root in a child's mind, the child having high-functioning autism or Asperger's, and then develop into long-term problems as an adult. Now, the link between the amygdala and anxiety served us really well back, 2 million years ago, when we were cavemen and we were facing life-threatening dangers every day. So let's say, for example, you encountered a saber-toothed tiger, and this tiger greeted you with a very loud, threatening growl, and his big incisor teeth were glaring at you, and so your amygdala would jump into action and trigger a fear response rather than encouraging you to go over there and pet the kitty, right? So in this case, you would either fight or flee or hide. But in addition, since this experience was accompanied by strong emotions, it would also be processed into a lifelong memory. So in other words, the next time you left your hut or your cave or whatever, you would generalize. In other words, you would know that all tigers, not only the one you met, are dangerous. And you, therefore, would wisely avoid being around them. Now, this was very useful back then. But in modern life, it creates a huge problem, especially if you're already hardwired to have an overly active amygdala like people on the autism spectrum and all across the spectrum have. So now, fast forward to today, a child with high-functioning autism or Asperger's is unfortunate to experience unsuccessful attempts at making friends, keeping friends, and socializing. In many cases, he wants to make friends, he just can't quite fit in, and so he gets ostracized, rejected, ridiculed, and even bullied. The uncomfortable feelings this will inevitably produce, coupled with the memory processing of the amygdala, will unfortunately start a vicious cycle of generalization and avoidance behavior. And what this means is the child will associate people with distressing emotions, and that'll stimulate anxiety, which will in turn reduce the child's ability to interact with people and interpret their behaviors positively. So when I say he generalizes, he in essence makes a thinking error that because these one or two people mistreated me, therefore all people will mistreat me. Now you fast forward to adulthood, where this person is trying to get into a romantic relationship with a neurotypical. He's already on guard. He's already been through a lifetime of rejection and ridicule, and now he's in the situation where he has to be highly social, which is not his cup of tea. And since he struggles socially, relationship problems inevitably occur. And as his partner tries to correct the relationship, sometimes this gets downloaded in his brain as criticism, and he has flashbacks to previous criticism, and so he is quick to feel like he's being yet again ridiculed, put down, and made to feel like shit. You could think of your Asperger's husband in this case as someone who has a severe sunburn. And you know, when you've ever had a severe sunburn, just a touch, just a mild touch by somebody else leaves you screaming. And so your Asperger's husband has already suffered some emotional damage from social failures previously in his life. And so now the slightest touch, in other words, the slightest positive or even constructive criticism, will be felt as painful criticism and put-downs.
His self-esteem is very low and very fragile, and he may not even know that. If he has ASD level 1, it comes from not quite being able to fit in. We're talking about way back in childhood. Couldn't quite fit in, was maybe ostracized by peers, rejected, bullied, teased, whatever. If he has ASD level 1, he's going to have mind blindness. It's going to be difficult for him to understand the motives of other people and why they behave the way they do. And unfortunately, if you don't know, you will fill in the blank with something negative. That's very popular for the ASD child and young adult and full-blown adult to negatively spin behavior that's not understood and motivation that's not understood. And he's also going to grow up going through life, if he has ASD level 1, not understanding his emotions or the emotions of others. He is going to have some executive function deficits. He's going to have anxiety as a result. He may also have sensory sensitivity, all of these things. So he has grown up, let's put it like this, where social contact, unless it was with people that were doing something very similar to what he was doing in his special interest area, social relationships were just fucking messy. They were messy. Could never quite figure out, how do I deal with this person? What am I doing wrong? No matter what I say or do, it's like there's a disconnect. To put in the context of the neurotypical wife, doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. I want to make her happy, but I just don't seem to make her happy. So, and I've had guys that tell me, I've had a few guys say, well, no, I think my self-esteem is pretty much intact. But when I do a little further investigation, they don't really know what high self-esteem looks like because their self-esteem has always been low. If you grow up in a dark room, and then somebody comes in one day, and let's say you're 50 years old, and says, wow, your room is really dark. And you go, what do you mean? It's always been like this. This is the norm. Another thing that many guys will tell me, but I don't feel particularly anxious. I don't think I have anxiety. Okay, well, when was the last time you shut down? Oh, well, earlier this morning. Okay, so if you don't have anything to contrast it with, you've always had chronic low-grade anxiety from pretty much day one. And you've always had low self-esteem for pretty much day two. You don't have any way to contrast, to compare. Well, I had high self-esteem and now I have low, so now I can tell that right now it's low or high. Or I've always been calm, but now I'm kind of anxious, and so I can see, I'm anxious because usually I'm calm. since even some of your neutral comments are not totally understood due to mind blindness and emotions blindness and executive function deficits. He, whoever he is, if he doesn't understand your motives, your behavior, why you're saying what you're saying, why you're feeling the way you feel, he will fill in the blank with something that is usually negative. In fact, I will say always negative. If I don't understand this thing, I'm going to fill in the blank with something. I'm going to give it my best guess. And it's going to be a negative spin for sure. It's going to be a negative reframe of your behavior. And so now I think that you're against me. I think you're out to get me. I think you're being parental. I think you're chastising me. I think that you think that I'm defective and flawed and you're trying to correct me and fix me.
Explain why your ASD spouse may be hypersensitive to criticism, even constructive criticism, and sometimes he or she may even download your neutral comments as criticism. So, 1, certain childhood experiences may lead to greater sensitivity. For example, a child who received constant harsh criticism or consistently mixed messages from his parents, caretakers, teachers, and so on, or someone who had difficulty getting along with peers, or someone who did not receive positive reinforcement for accomplishments, or whose sense of competence and confidence was not fostered or allowed to flourish, is likely to have difficulty receiving and processing criticism in a healthy manner. Furthermore, when a parent has unrealistic high expectations of a child or overprotects the child from any disappointment or criticism, this too may lead the child to become more sensitive to criticism as an adult. Number 2, a cognitive bias that leads the ASD individual to interpret ambiguous information in a negative way may also contribute to his or her sensitivity to criticism. Some people are more sensitive to criticism than others due to this cognitive bias that leads them to interpret ambiguous information negatively rather than in a neutral or positive manner. Now, a sensitivity to criticism describes not only the person's reaction to critical feedback, but also his ability to understand or interpret criticism. A person who experiences a greater sensitivity to criticism may be more likely to experience a decrease in motivation to cooperate, and he or she may also want to avoid further opportunities for criticism to potentially manifest, which means he or she may not want to engage in any conversations that are reminiscent of past conversations where they downloaded their NT spouse's message as insulting. And of course, low self-esteem can make one very sensitive to criticism. Mind blindness, emotions blindness, some executive function deficits, anxiety, problems with prediction, all of those can also at some level contribute to a hypersensitivity to criticism. Having said all that, sometimes criticism is negative and hurtful, and criticism that's intended as a personal attack can be harmful. So when criticism is excessively harsh, it's nothing short of being full-blown, unadulterated bullying. Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you.